All right. Gaza War day 340. No end in sight, although in the past few days we've seen the biggest demonstrations ever so far for a ceasefire deal in Israel, in Tel Aviv. 500,000, 750,000, something approaching 10% of Israel's population is on the street. It's not going to be enough. It's big in Tel Aviv, but it's not going to be enough. Netanyahu knows that this is not enough, that the majority of the country is with him and his strategy. I tweeted that a summary of Netanyahu government strategy and his allies in the coalition is that no lives matter. There, I've phrased it in other ways, but it's not about, how many more lives, how many more Jewish lives, how many more non-Jewish lives are worth one Jewish life, because Israel is trying to kill all of their Israeli hostages. They've been trying to kill them all since October 7th. And the Australian news is reporting this now that it's too late to make a difference. And apparently, Netanyahu sent a mediator to try to make a separate deal with Islamic Palestinian Islamic Jihad, absent Hamas. That also didn't work. So, overall, no prospect for a negotiated settlement. I don't know if anyone was watching Kamala Harris and Trump debate tonight. I'm not. As you can see, I'm recording right now. But maybe they maybe they'll provide you with some new insight into the situation. I have my doubts. The Supreme Court of India struck down a case where the people were pleading for a halt to the supply of weapons to Israel. India supplies small amount of weapons to Israel, but enough to be complicit in the genocide, enough to be a partner in the genocide, and thanks to the Supreme Court decision, it's they will continue to be that. That's a very different role than India used to play in Israel Palestine, but it's the new India. It's the Modi India, and that's how that's how they're going to play it in Gaza. Interesting developments. You've probably seen the second Al-Mawasi massacre, the second one that I know about, another tent massacre with massive 2,000-pound bombs. You may have seen the craters, 9-meter craters made by these bombs dropped on people in tents. It was a school massacre in Gaza City at the Halima Al Saida school in Jabalia. There was a massacre at the Hinnawi family home in Jabalia. There was a massacre at the Al Najjar family home in Jabalia. So Jabalia is coming in for particular vindictive depravity. In central Gaza, interesting story here though. In central Gaza, there was a report of a serious wounding of an officer in a tunnel collapse. Tunnels don't collapse by accident, and this tunnel and this officer could very well be, according to the Al Quds news network, Colonel Golan Vach, the Israeli officer who made the initial claims about the beheaded babies and rapes, both of which were lies. He may have been commanding some operation in Gaza, and he may, in fact, be dead. He was such a liar that he told reporters that he personally carried the decapitated baby from Kibbutz Berry. Survivors' witnesses later contradicted his account, stating that no infants and toddlers were among the dead. So Cohen, no, not Cohen, Golan Vach, Colonel Golan Vach may be dead, maybe not. There are contradictory claims, but this story from Quds News Network says that he was the one who died in this tunnel collapse. Rafah City, there was supposedly a reportedly a difficult incident for the Israeli military in the Philadelphia corridor in Rafah. 5 helicopters, the Resistance News reports, arrived to transport the wounded in Zaytun in Gaza City. So back up to the north of Gaza, several helicopters were spotted transporting soldiers. There's another report of a helicopter crashing in Gaza following anti-aircraft fire. Perhaps, perhaps anti-aircraft in Gaza is improving, or it could be a one-off. We'll see. Time will tell. Speaking of resistance anti-aircraft, let's take a quick trip over to Yemen. You may have heard that 2 more MQ-9 Reaper drones were shot down in Yemen, and the British, in response to losing these American unmanned killer aircraft, the British bombed a girls' school in Yemen. So one side is taking down drones over their own country, and the other side is bombing girls' schools. So back to Palestine, the West Bank. You probably heard that Turkish American activist Aysenur, I think she also goes by Aisha Ezgi, was shot in the head by Israeli snipers near Nablus in Jenin. They're starting to repair the roads and infrastructure. They got the electricity back on after the 10-day long attack by Israel on Jenin. There's still videos coming out of IED attacks and other attacks on armored vehicles in Jenin. They're still fighting in Tulkarm. They're still fighting in Nablus, which is where the Turkish American remarkable young woman, another Rachel Corrie we have, another one of these nonviolent activists who went to try to make a difference, and she did make a difference, and the Israelis assassinated her. So Saraya al-Quds, in terms of the West Bank battle, Saraya al-Quds, that's the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they gave the following summary of all of their operations in the West Bank during the Horror of the Camps battle. Ooh, excuse me. Remember, the resistance calls it the Horror of the Camps. The Israelis actually call it summer camps. They're calling their fight, they're calling their assault on the civilian infrastructure of the northern West Bank towns summer camps. Anyway, Jenin, the resistance reports 51 direct armed clashes, 3 ambushes of infantry forces, 36 explosive devices targeting enemy infantry forces and vehicles. Tulkarm, 30 direct armed clashes, 3 ambushes of infantry forces, 27 explosive devices targeting infantry forces and vehicles, 2 sniping operations in different missions, downing a drone. In Nablus, 2 explosive devices targeted enemy infantry forces and vehicles, 8 direct armed clashes. Sorry, guys, it's late here. Um, I know many of you have complained, not many of you, people who have been blocked subsequently have complained about me, my soporific voice. It's true that I do talk like this more or less in real life, but I do also record these videos after everybody in my house is asleep. And that's the time window that I have. And so for the past few ones, I've been yawning and I apologize. Anyway, Tubas, an explosive device targeted enemy infantry forces and vehicles, 1 and 8 direct armed clashes. So really to give you a sense of the scale of these battles, these are big battles. These are big armed battles, vastly disproportionate, even more so arguably in terms of weaponry in the West Bank than in Gaza. But like I said before, the West Bank is a big territory, much bigger than Gaza. There's a lot of space to cover. It's more mountainous. It's You know, it's not it, and the Israelis, I've also said, have built the roads and the wall and the settlements and everything, the architecture of occupation to facilitate them raiding and invading at will. However, it is a big territory and it is not a trivial problem for them and not a resource light project to keep the West Bank in line while also committing genocide in Gaza, while also trying to hold off or maintain some kind of presence at the border with Hezbollah and having their economy wrecked by Yemen and now sealing off Jordan. Have I mentioned Jordan? You've probably seen the news about Jordan where a driver killed three security personnel, Israeli security personnel at the border crossing, the Karame border crossing, aka the Allenby Bridge. So Israel responded by sealing the border and they abused various workers and truck drivers. They did all kinds of the abusive things they do. They're sealing off the West Bank for their own security. But this is a bit problematic for them because the Yemeni the Yemeni resistance, Ansar Allah, is slowly constricting their shipping through their naval blockade, which the Americans have been utterly unable to do anything to stop. And after this attack, I'm sure they'll reopen the border. But after this attack, the Israelis have sealed off the border with Jordan for a bit. And if they seal off the border with Jordan, and their border with Lebanon is this active war zone, and their sea routes are compromised. And there's even clashes with Egypt because they're fighting with Egypt on the Philadelphia court. Not fighting yet, but Egypt has sent a whole bunch of troops and made videos of their troops at the Philadelphia corridor on the Egypt side of Rafah. And so that's kind of tense too. So it's like they're besieging the Palestinians, but they're in Palestine. That's where they decided to build their colony. So they're also besieging themselves. This is also, the Zionists love the wall, but the Zionists hate the wall. They've always hated the wall they built, the so-called apartheid wall, because they were like, yeah, okay, this wall keeps the Palestinians out, but it also keeps us in. And Zionism has to expand. Zionism has to go kill people and take their land and go and murder people for it to be Zionism. And if they're stuck behind a wall hiding for security, that's not real Zionism anymore. It's something else. Speaking of Hezbollah, there are some deeper strikes, and Israel's been targeting the Lebanese civil defense directly the way they target Gaza civil defense too. Paramedics, they kind of target medics and civil defense people. There's so that's also just, you know, slowly escalating, slowly escalating, slowly going deeper into Israel, the Hezbollah strikes. So there's an interesting quote from Hisham Safieddin. He's the Hezbollah Executive Council chair. So he was speaking on the 40th anniversary of the death of Fouad Shukr, the assassination of Fouad Shukr in Beirut. And he said, by assassinating Fouad Shukr, by targeting his nickname, Sayyid Mohsen, the Israelis added Tel Aviv to their target list. They managed, the enemy, he said, the enemy um, now put Tel Aviv on the agenda. So now the resistance feels free to target Tel Aviv as well. So as this continues to escalate, more targets will be added, and as Hezbollah said, Tel Aviv is on the list now. There's also okay, Syria. The last thing to talk about is Syria. So a couple days ago, the Israelis did a more extensive airstrike against Syria than they've done in years. They hit Tartus, Homs, Masyaf, and Hama in more than a dozen airstrikes. Syria reported 16 plus people killed, 36 injured, six in critical condition. That's the figures as of a couple days ago. But I haven't seen any update. So apparently, again, air defense, in terms of the story of air defense, there were some successes reported by air defense, including the downing, according to Syrian sources, of an F-16 by Syrian air defense, which is a big deal. People have asked me, why would Israel attack Syria so intensely at this exact moment? And um, I think it's analogous to the West Bank. Everything Israel is doing right now is to try to find a way to escalate the situation with minimal cost to themselves. So that's why they didn't attack Lebanon, they attacked the West Bank, and they're bombing Syria because Syria, the rules of engagement with Syria are that Syria has basically allowed Israel to bomb them for years. Israel's bombed Syria for years and years, and Syria does not feel like they're in a position to go to war with Israel over this. They have to, they support Lebanon, they support the resistance, they support Hezbollah, as writer Patrick Higgins wrote in Middle East Critique. This is actually why. Um, I'm going to look this up for you and just put that on the screen. I put it on the screen before, many, many months ago. Gunning for Damascus, it's called. The War on the Syrian Arab Republic. Hold on, let me pull it up. Gunning for Damascus. Oh boy. Gunning for Damascus, the U.S. War on the Syrian Arab Republic by Patrick Donovan Higgins. And the argument that he makes is that Syria is what he calls the strategic depth of the Palestinian movement. They're the ones who, you know, they're basically responsible for arming Hezbollah. They're responsible for um, that route, the route of weapons and technology and everything comes through Syria. And if Syria had been on its feet and not in a civil war situation, a foreign backed regime change operation since 2011, I think a lot of the wars against Gaza and a lot of the ramping genocidal um, intensity that Israel has brought to Gaza, brought to bear against Gaza, would not have been possible if Syria was in the, an intact state that was supportive of the resistance and that had its army intact instead of being in a fratricidal war. Fratricidal, yeah. I mean, fratricidal war where Syrians have been dying and sanctions have been applied and the economy has been targeted and destroyed, and where ISIS and Al Qaeda and HTS and all these groups, I mean, three-letter groups, ultimately underwritten by the ultimate three-letter group, which is the CIA operation to try to overthrow the regime in Syria. So Syria is so important, and the attempted destruction of Syria and the partial destruction of Syria is what has facilitated this genocide to the state. And that's part of why Syria cannot retaliate the way that Hezbollah can, even. His Syria is not in that kind of a position. So Russia, as you know, maybe, in 2015 intervened more or less to save the Syrian regime from American bombing. So America was planning to finish the help Al Qaeda, etc., Al Qaeda and ISIS finish the conquest of Syria and the destruction of the Syrian state by bombing Damascus. And the Russian Air Force entered the war and basically showed, as John Kerry and others acknowledged at the time, that if the US escalated, then Russia would escalate. And so the whole thing sort of de escalated and cooled down from that point on. Instead of having the US continue into a war with Russia, they kind of backed off of that. Now they're fighting in Ukraine, but they backed off of that. That was a very tense moment in 2015. It was a big risk that Russia took, but Russia has tried to deconflict, especially with Israel. So Russia also sort of, I wouldn't say allows, but makes diplomatic complaints with Israel when Israel attacks Syria. And Russia does provide Syria with air defense complexes, but Russia's not going to Russia's not going to bomb Israel in response for Israel bombing Syria. And possibly Russia, as Syria's ally, is involved in convincing Syria not to do the same. And so that all makes the possible downing of an F-16 by the Syrian air defense a big deal. And if it did happen, you'll never see the Israelis admit it. So we'll have to see whether we get any kind of confirmation about it and whether Israel's behavior does change as a result of knowing that there's the possibility of its fighter jets and bombers being shot down by Syrian air defense. Even Lebanon has some of these air defense complexes and has forced the Israeli Air Force to retreat in the past. Okay, so where does that leave us on day 340? It leaves us in the attrition war. It leaves us with no negotiated settlement on the horizon. It leaves us with ongoing massacres and more to come. It leaves us with demonstrations in Israel and divisions in Israel that are at the moment not big enough to turn the tide. It leaves us with a potentially important Israeli commander possibly losing his life in the attack. It leaves us with major fighting continuing in the West Bank and slow escalation on the Lebanon border. So that's the sit rep. That's the situation. That's the situation report on day 340. And I'm not expecting a ceasefire by day 365. And I think we'll probably just go by date after that. I don't think we'll keep counting days. Instead, we'll just do a sit rep by date. Um, since, day 500 or day 700 probably starts to mean less than just going by year, because this thing is probably going to go on for years. All right. I'll stop there. Like and subscribe, please, and hang in there. We'll see you in the next one.